Thank you very much. The 1-minute speeches have expired under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Sherfellis McCormick, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material on the subject of this special order hour.
Without objection, so ordered.
It is with great honor that I rise today to co-anchor the CBC Special Order Hour, along with my distinguished colleague, Rep. Jackson from Illinois. For the next 60 minutes, members of the CBC have an opportunity to speak directly to the American people on Black veterans and their contributions to America, an issue of great importance to the Congressional Black Caucus, Congress, and the constituents we all represent, and all Americans. It is now my privilege to yield the floor to the Honorable Chairman Stephen Hartford from Nevada.
I'd like to thank the gentlelady from Florida and for her tremendous leadership in serving as co-chair, not just for tonight's special order hour on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus, but every time that Representative Sheila Sherfellis McCormick and Representative Jonathan Jackson are able to lead in this time. I also rise with my colleagues of the Congressional Black Caucus to thank and recognize our active duty servicemen and servicewomen, and to honor Black veterans from around the nation, those who have returned to civilian life, and those who are serving here in Congress. I also would like to thank all of their families who also serve along them in the freedoms that we hold dear. I rise today to honor them for their service, their patriotism, their courage, and of course, their sacrifice in keeping our nation safe and free. Unfortunately, the stories of Black veterans are too often untold. Even now, the very history of their service is under threat of being taken out of our schools. It is important that we never forget the unique history and contribution of our nation's Black veterans, like the Tuskegee Airmen, and we cannot ignore inequities Black veterans have faced over generations, like being denied benefits in the GI Bill following World War II, something that our Assistant Democratic Leader, Mr. Clyburn, and members of the Congressional Black Caucus are working to address. Black veterans account for nearly 1/3 of our nation's unhoused veteran population, and Black veterans are nearly 2 times as likely to live in poverty. As a Congress, we must fulfill our responsibility to repay our veterans for their service, including to the Black servicemen and servicewomen who are still making contributions to our nation today. With that, I would like to take the opportunity to tell the stories of a few of our veterans from Nevada's 4th Congressional District, who represent the best that Nevada and our country have to offer. One of those constituents was a service member named Kelly. Kelly, towards the end of her service in the Air Force, her health began to deteriorate. After consulting with doctors, she was diagnosed with untreated fibroids, which caused her immense pain and forced her to rely on pain medications. In the early years, there were no women's clinics, and Kelly had only male doctors attending to her care. But the VA's renewed focus on addressing the unique needs of women's veteran means there is now a safe space where Kelly can feel comfortable alongside fellow women veterans who share similar experiences. Christina is another Black woman from my district who is in the Air Force. She served from 2002 until her medical retirement in 2008. Tragically, during her service, she fell victim to sexual assault, which caused her immense trauma and impacted her mental health. After leaving the military, she grasped her need for help and turned to the VA, where she engaged with programs such as cognitive behavior therapy, cognitive processing therapy, and dialectical behavior therapy. She was set on a path to recovery which affirmed her strength. Her story serves as a reminder that we must ensure that we provide the support and the resources our service members need. I also want to share a story because I was recently honored to help document the story of Montford Point Marines through an interview with the Henry Franklin Jackson and the family of Isaac McMickens. They were among the first Black Americans to enlist in the Marine Corps, and they trained at Montford Point. By preserving their stories for generations to come, we can ensure that we honor their sacrifices. We will never be able to fully repay our veterans given the sacrifices that they've made for our country. But as a Congress, we can make sure that we do all that we can to ensure that they have what they need when they return home. It is because of the challenges that our veterans faced that I was so proud to support the Pact Act, which is one of the most significant expansions of benefits and services for toxic exposed veterans in more than 30 years. This historic piece of legislation is helping to deliver more timely benefits and services to more than 5 million veterans, including thousands from Nevada, who were impacted by toxic exposures while serving our country. Again, I want to thank my colleagues from the Congressional Black Caucus for their commitment to supporting our nation's veterans, for recognizing the role Black veterans play in American history, and for sharing the story of veterans in our districts. Thank you to our CBC colleagues who are able to join for this important topic tonight, and to our co-chairs for their extraordinary leadership and managing this special order hour. Thank you again, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is now my privilege to yield to the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas.
I thank the gentlelady and the gentleman from Illinois, and I add my appreciation as the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus has indicated. Mr. Horswood, I want to thank you both for your continuing leadership. And this is a particularly important special order honoring our veterans far and wide, and then telling the stories of our Black veterans who often have been at the wrong end of the history of this country. It should be noted that African Americans, some enslaved, have fought in every war since the Revolutionary War. And it is extremely important to recognize that sometimes their stories have not been told. I was very pleased today to support the legislation that supported a veterans COLA, cost of living. We all know that veterans have, as I indicated on the floor, been victims of homelessness, been discriminated against in terms of not appreciating their service, taking their service where they are commanding thousands and giving them an entry-level job. I think it is important that we recognize the importance of their work. We also know that there's been many who have had service-related injuries who have not been fully compensated. We continue to fight against those who've had Agent Orange. And certainly we are more than excited about the passage of the Pact Act brought in the House, where I introduced the Jackson Lee Amendment, which would have required a report on the feasibility of modifying the individual longitudinal exposure record. That act, of course, even without changes, was in fact to add to providing protection to our veterans. And so I wanted to emphasize the stories of veterans who have fought and who have been at every war. And that includes the wars of the 1800s, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan. I want to acknowledge our friend and colleague, the Honorable Charlie Rangel, who was a Korean War vet in the worst of time and the most cold of time and an ugly war, but a war. And he reminded us during his tenure here that the Korean War was not a conflict, it was in fact a war. The generals that fought in World War II and who still came home to a segregated America. And we must be remembering of those individuals, some who fell out of skies in World War I and World War II. We've come full circle to the Vietnam War, where there was 50,000 who died, large numbers of African Americans who lost their life. General Colin Powell fought in that war, was wounded, and I pay tribute to him tonight, who ultimately became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and as well ultimately Secretary of State. He had a passion for peace, believed in peace. Though he was a warrior and a combat leader, he understood the value of peace. We thank him for his service. My own constituent, Sergeant Williams, a Buffalo soldier who fought in the Vietnam War, who lives today exhibiting the bravery of that time. Thank you to his service. And then those who have come full circle in Iraq and Afghanistan, who happen to be African American men and women, who rose to the ranks of lieutenants and majors. Globally, I want to say thank you to them and the many of them that serve in my congressional district. This is an important moment as we approach the Memorial Day weekend for those who wore the uniform unselfishly and then lost their lives. And I also, as I supported this COLA increase for our veterans, I want to remind many of us that there are many homeless veterans. Many of them are black veterans. I want to particularly say to them that their status today does not diminish their bravery and service to this nation. It should be our commitment that we should not leave any veteran behind and not any veteran homeless. That will be my commitment, that we continue to fight against that scourge of homeless veterans who want to be reunited with their family members, who are in need of the services that will make them whole. Finally, let me say this. As this nation deals with default, we cannot forget the veterans who will lose 30 million health care appointments and as well will in fact suffer and not have a COLA. Remember what happens when there is no bipartisan effort and our friends continue to insist on hostage taking. The people who insult or who lose out will be the people who are in fact our very special veterans. With that, I thank you for yielding, and again, thank you for honoring our veterans in this week.
Thank you, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. It is now my privilege to yield to the Honorable Maxine Waters from the state of California.
Thank you very much. I thank the gentle lady from Texas for affording me this time. And I'm very pleased to join with all of my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus to honor the veterans, African American, black veterans who have served this country so honorably. We could talk all night about the contributions that have been made, the sacrifices that have been made, and so we will take this time to point out not only the contributions, but individuals who have played an important role as blacks in the military. First, I'd like to share that in 1994, I introduced legislation that was H.R. 3013 to create the Center for Women's Veterans. And it became law under a bill under Sonny Montgomery, who was the chair of the Veterans Committee at that time. And I think that overall bill was the Veterans Benefits Improvements Act. And I'm very pleased that that center has paid attention to some of the concerns that we've had about the treatment of women, black women in particular. I'd like to bring to your attention someone from my district who is an extraordinary woman who happens to be a veteran. Patricia Jackson Kelly is a military veteran of the United States Air Force and of the United States Army and Navy Reserves, having served our nation collectively for 26 years, where she rose to the top rank of Lieutenant Colonel after serving honorably on both active duty and in the reserves. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Kelly recently completed a 4-year impressive term as the national president of the National Association of Black Military Women with chapters across the United States. While serving our nation in the armed forces and post-service, Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Kelly served as a program manager for a 40-bed substance abuse ward and as the woman veteran program manager with the Department of Veterans Affairs, West Los Angeles. During her term on executive staff, she was instrumental in implementing programs and increased funds and resources for women veterans. During her time at the Veterans Hospital, she also served as one of the initial board members during the inaugural formation of U.S. Vets. Patricia Jackson Kelly is also a commissioner for the County of Los Angeles and serving in the 2nd District for Military and Veterans Affairs and commander for the American Legion, Jackie Robinson 252 post. Most recently, she was appointed by the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs Sexual Assault and Harassment Prevention Task Force Working Group covering national concerns and issues. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Kelly has received awards and commendations from President George Bush, California Governor's Office, 2006 through 2009, NAACP, Blacks in Government, and many top community organizations. In 2010, she was selected as Southern California Women Veteran of the Year by the California Department of Veterans Affairs, and she was the inaugural recipient of the PFC Gladys Schuster Award, Trailblazer Award, August 2012. Jackson Kelly was recognized by former Department of Veteran Affairs Secretary Robert McDonnell for her service on the National Center for Minority Veterans Committee from 2015 to 2017. In 2017, Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Kelly was awarded the Lifetime Legacy Award by Connected Women of Influence. In 2018, she received the Crystal Eagle Award by Los Angeles County African American Employees Association. Also in 2018, Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Kelly was honored with the Holman Community Development Corporation Quiet Champion Award, the City of Los Angeles Hall of Fame Award, and was named UCLA Veteran of the Year. In 2019, she was a Hollywood Business and Professional Women Black History Month honoree. Lieutenant Jackson Kelly was one of the honorees of the National Daughters of the American Revolution Women in American History 2021-2022. August 20th, 2022, she received the prestigious African-Focused Goodwill Lifetime Achievement Award. And I just want to say that she is one of many African-American women who have served honorably this country, and she deserves to be recognized. And this evening, I hope that by giving her this recognition, she will understand that we appreciate her so very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you so much, Representative Maxine Waters. It is now my privilege to yield to the Honorable Gwen Moore.
I just want to thank the gentlelady for yielding and thank Ms. Surflius McCormick and Representative Jackson for hosting this special hour. I can tell you that as a member of a family whose relatives and brothers and dad and uncles have served in the service, Memorial Day weekend is very, very important to me. And as our nation prepares to celebrate this Memorial Day, I'm so pleased to join my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus on the floor to recall the great sacrifice of all that we ask to put on the uniform. Memorial Day is a stark reminder of the cost of that service and the sacrifice that comes with taking that oath. There are few other callings in life as humble or as selfless as the sacrifice of a member of the military. We owe them so much. And because of this sacrifice, this distinguished body is able to gather today, tomorrow, and the next day under the e pluribus unum in this chamber. Because of their sacrifices, there are so many more who are inspired to put on the uniform and will do so in the coming days. But while Memorial Day reminds us to celebrate those who have given the ultimate sacrifice, Memorial Day also urges us to do something active for those veterans that are serving now, that are standing up our freedoms and liberties. And so I'm so tremendously proud of the work that the House Democrats have done to continue in this regard. Efforts like the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson promise to address comprehensive toxics, the Pact Act, that is being aggressively implemented by the administration to ensure it fulfill a promise providing generations of veterans with the care and benefits that they have earned and deserve. This new law creates a strong framework for expanding and extending eligibility for VA health care for veterans exposed to toxic substances during their time in uniform. This for too long, Mr. Speaker, veterans have had to fight just to get benefits that they earned for exposure to some dangerous toxins while they were in uniform. More than 3.3 million veterans have received the new toxic exposure screening set up by this new law. And I'm grateful that while many of them have passed on, those who are alive will get some remuneration for their suffering. But on this day, I especially want to remember other veterans who did not necessarily die in combat, but they died even so as a result of their service. Someone like my constituent, Corey Adams. Corey Adams wanted to serve his country and follow in his father's and grandfather's footsteps. So he joined the Air Force right after high school. And this week, I intend to introduce a bill named after him. Corey served 4 years on active duty, and then he joined the Air Force Reserve. He had overseas deployments, including 6 months in Afghanistan in 2009. Sergeant Corey Adams was later diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and moved into his parents' home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A very, very fragile veteran. On March 20th, 2017, the Adams family was changed forever. Sergeant Corey Adams was missing, and they knew he was vulnerable. His family tried to file a missing report soon after he went missing. It took 8 days before the police determined that he met the criteria of a missing person, a crucial delay. 18 days after his disappearance, Sergeant Corey Adams' body was found in a pond recovered from Deneen Park, 1 mile from his mother's home. And last month marked the 6th year since his body was found. No family should suffer like this. And out of this tragedy, his family took action and went to the Wisconsin legislature. And therefore, due to their advocacy, Wisconsin became the first state to enact a green alert system to find veterans who are reported missing. And that system has already worked to help successfully locate missing veterans. Delaware, Tennessee, and Texas have since enacted laws to do the same, and other states are currently looking to do the same. The legislation that I will be introducing this week in his honor would help establish a national program at the Department of Justice to help create a strong and robust green alert system network across our country to help ensure that when a veteran goes missing, we do all we can to find them. We will leave no soldier behind. And with legislation like the Corey Adams Searchlight Act, the Pact Act, and so many other thoughtful bills that have been introduced so far by my colleagues in this Congress, we make sure that Memorial Day is also a time to act and to make sure that we enact policies that make clear to our veterans and our service members that we will always have their backs, always. I want to thank each and every one of the men and women in uniform today and all of our veterans. And I yield back to the gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you so much, Representative Gwen Moore. It is now my privilege to yield to the Honorable Donald Payne from New Jersey.
I'd like to thank the gentlelady from Florida for the opportunity to address you tonight in this special order hour, and the gentleman from Illinois, showing great leadership in what is a wholesome and honorable responsibility to lead these special order hours. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor our fallen African American veterans in the week before Memorial Day and discuss what the Pact Act will do to help all surviving veterans. Almost 200,000 Black Americans died while fighting to protect U.S. freedoms. They fought in every major U.S. conflict, from the Revolutionary War to the Iraq War. In fact, the first person to die in the Revolutionary Wars for our war for freedom was Crispus Attucks, an African American. The names of the regiments are emblazoned in American history. Names like the Buffalo Soldiers, the Tuskegee Airmen, and the Harlem Hellfighters. In my district, they continue to make a difference in local industry and local politics. Black soldiers are America's forgotten heroes. They fought in foreign wars to protect our nation. Then they fought oppression, racism, and hatred when they returned home. Not welcome in the restaurants, not welcome in the hotels, not welcome to drink from certain fountains, but fought far and wide away from this nation. They deserve more than the usual thanks for your service. They receive from across the country, and I am proud to support a law that helps them get more support. The Sergeant First Class Health, Heath Robinson, honoring our promise to address Comprehensive Toxics Act, or the Pact Act, could be the largest veterans health care and benefits expansion in American history. The Pact Act expands and extends eligibility for Veterans Administration health care to veterans who have suffered toxic exposure. And it does the same for veterans of the Vietnam War, Gulf War, and the other post-9/11 conflicts that we have engaged in. That means 5 million veterans could be eligible for benefits thanks to this act. Also, the Pact Act adds more than 20 health conditions to the list of eligibility for VA health benefits, such as exposure to Agent Orange, burn pits, and other toxins. And it requires the VA to provide toxic exposure screening to every veteran enrolled in the VA healthcare system. But local veterans and advocates are excited about more than these benefits. They are telling district veterans that the Pact Act will allow them to get physicals to find service-related ailments and disabilities. These physicals could allow more eligible veterans to enroll in the VA healthcare system and help them register as an American veteran for health-related or other benefits nationwide. But the VA has to do a better job in contacting veterans to encourage them to participate. Some veterans in my district said the VA has a version of the notorious don't ask, don't tell policy. They say if you don't ask the VA about the benefits directly, they won't let you know. And that seems to be a theme that runs across the federal government. There's so many projects and plans and opportunities for people across this nation, just everyday normal Americans, but if you don't know the right question to ask, the information is not forthcoming. Now, nobody will mislead you, but you have to ask the right question, and then they're forthcoming with the information. That has to change. And we honor the nations, and as we honor our nation's fallen heroes, we must do more to support veterans and other American heroes. That way, our dedication to the men and women who protect our country and keep us safe will be more than words. It will be a direct action. And I am just delighted to be here to raise this issue. There shouldn't have to be an acknowledgement separately of African American veterans, but this country, in some ways, have forgotten them. And so we have to raise the issue. We don't want it. We want to be a part of the collective of this great nation. But there's so many instances where the contributions of this population are left out. And so we are here to make sure it's clear and to correct the history. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative. Mr. Speaker, I rise to honor our nation's brave Black service members. I rise not only for our veterans who served our nation with honor and integrity, but also for those who gave the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our country. Black soldiers have fought and given their lives in every American conflict since the Revolutionary War, fighting for democracy at home and abroad, while being treated like second-class citizens on American soil. In 1944, this very body passed the GI Bill to provide free education, unemployment pay, and home loans for millions of veterans returning from World War II. These benefits helped to expand the American middle class after the war, but Black veterans were excluded from these benefits due to our nation's original sin. This expulsion helped to widen the already existing wealth gap between white and Black Americans, the same gap that we feel and see today. The wide disparity in the bill's implementation increased wealth, education, and civil rights gaps. The inequitable implementation of the GI Bill shut the door for 1.2 million Black people, veterans, who bravely served the community during World War II in segregated ranks. The willingness on the part of African American soldiers to serve and sacrifice their lives for a country that treated them as second-class citizens is beyond remarkable. It wasn't until President Truman's Executive Order 9981 that the armed services were forced to desegregate, but by this time the demand had already been done. In the South, the GI Bill exacerbated rather than narrowed the economic educational attainment of Black veterans. After World War II, Black veterans wanted to attend college in the South were restricted in their choices of about 100 public and private institutions. Only 6% of African American veterans of World War II earned college degrees, compared to 19% of white veterans. For over 200 years, Black soldiers have endured individual and institutional racism while fighting for their country. It is time to honor every Black veteran and soldier who paid the ultimate sacrifice while fighting for a more perfect union at home. May their memory be a blessing, and may this Congress rectify injustices delivered on this very floor. I'd like to now yield back to the Honorable Jonathan Jackson from the state of Illinois.
I'd like to thank my distinguished colleague, the Honorable Sheila Surfulis McCormick. I'd like to thank the Honorable Gwen Moore. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to give special consideration to the contribution and bravery of Black soldiers and veterans. Veterans in this country deserve far more than we have thus far been willing to give them. And certainly Black veterans are more than eligible for the kind of dignity and respect too long denied to them, both in and out of the armed services. Let us never forget that in several instances, the enemies of America were treated better than Black soldiers fighting for America. I remember my grandfather today, Charles Henry Jackson, who was working 3 jobs for a man in South Carolina that, after having been disrespected, told the man he could keep his jobs, although our family needed the money, needed the work so that we could feed the family. The young man then went on to turn my grandfather in to the Army recruiting office and had him enlisted, drafted into World War II. Having fought in World War II and been honorably discharged, he recounted the story for me when he came back from New York City down on the train in first class, down to Union Station not far from here. And by the time they were heading back south to the Jim Crow era of the South, he had to go to the second class coach cars in the back of the train so that Nazi POW prisoners could sit in first class right here in Washington, D.C., right here in America. Let us never forget the kind of bigotry and hatred the Black soldiers had to endure simply because of the color of their skin. And it would be a tragedy of the worst kind for us to no longer remember the intrinsic, systemic evils that prevented African Americans from receiving equity in health care and the distribution of benefits, once again, simply because of the color of their skin. There have always been gross inequities in how Black veterans have been treated, and regrettably, this has always been the case. A recent internal document from the Department of Veteran Affairs obtained by the NPR revealed that Black veterans are less likely to get approved for benefits associated with conditions like PTSD. According to NPR, an internal report developed by the Veterans Administration found that Black veterans who filed claims for PTSD were rejected on average 12% more often than their white counterparts. Thankfully, the VA's Equity Task Force has been alerted to this problem and is dedicated to making improvements. But this is not the first time Black veterans have been treated with difference and disrespect. Black soldiers were never allowed to have full and unfettered access to the benefits enshrined to them in the GI Bill. In some cases, Black veterans could not take advantage of the GI Bill simply because they were not granted an honorable discharge. In other cases, even when Black veterans properly qualified for full range of benefits, they were denied them because of segregation and anti-integration policies. In fact, one congressman I've researched, in particular Congressman John Rankin, a Southern Dixiecrat, did everything in his power to exclude Black veterans from receiving the unemployment benefits enshrined in the bill. We were thick on words and thin on deeds. And when those benefits could not be legally denied, in the legislation itself. Local postmasters conspired in an effort not to deliver the forms to Black veterans needed to fill out in order to receive their unemployment benefits. In 1947, only 2 of the more than 3,200 VA guaranteed home loans in 13 Mississippi counties went to Black veterans. And this was not just a Southern problem. In New York, in the northern Jersey suburbs, fewer than 100 of the 67,000 mortgages insured by the GI Bill supported the home purchases of African American veterans. That's 100 out of 67,000. It means that less than 0.15% of the loans in that area went to Black veterans. And the list goes on and on. The kind of inequalities and inequities and indignities that Black soldiers and Black veterans have had to endure amount to a cacophony of slights, the full list of which I do not have the time to fully mention. And yet Black people have fought in every major war that this country has ever had because we are a brave and an honorable people. And when we fought, nobody was doing us a favor. Call the roll. From the Revolutionary War to the Battle of 1812, to the Civil War, to the Spanish-American War, to World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, Black people have always been willing to serve. Today we honor Black veterans because of their bravery and what they had to endure, and because of what they accomplished in spite of it all. We honor their sacrifices and their service. We honor their dignity and determination. Without Black veterans, there could be no Colin Powell. Without Black veterans, there could be no Lloyd Austin. Without a long history of brave Black veterans, there is no such thing as a Black commander-in-chief. The governor of Florida can act like Black history isn't important to America, but there would be no American history without Blacks in our history. Our thoughts are with Black veterans today because history remembers the men and women who put their shoulders to the wheel of progress and push until one dies and another world is born. We will never forget the contribution of Black veterans because they did what racism said could never be done. They proved to the world that Black people are brave and innovative as anyone else. They proved to the world that when the game is fair and the rules are public and the playing field is even, Black people can do anything. And I must tell you, Mr. Speaker, that I'm proud to be a part of a caucus and a party that does more than just send thoughts and prayers to our veterans. During the last Congress, under the leadership of the Honorable Nancy Pelosi and the Honorable Steny Hoyer and the Honorable Jim Clyburn and our current leader, the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries, Democrats in the House of Representatives led the way to passing the Pact Act. This important law expands VA health care benefits for veterans exposed to burn pits, Agent Orange, and other toxic substances. I'm grateful to be a part of a party and an institution that continues to find ways to honor its commitments to our veterans. It should not have taken us this long to decide that if we expose the brave men and women of our armed services to toxic conditions, the least we could do is make sure they have access to all of the health care they need to recover. From the Vietnam War to all of our post-9/11 conflicts, our soldiers have been exposed to all kinds of horrific substances, and yet we could not find the political will to dedicate specific resources to this particular aspect of modern war. The devastating effects of dangerous toxins have been an albatross around the necks of our brave men and women for far too long. But as the old saying goes, better late than never. Several members of the Congressional Black Caucus, who were part of the 117th caucus, were instrumental in the passing of this restorative law. And that's how I view the Pact Act. This law widens the path that leads to greater restoration for the men and women we ask to risk their lives in defense of this country. This law deepens the validity of the promise we made as a country to these honorable soldiers. Call me a dreamer, but I just may happen to believe that when we ask people to do extraordinary things, it's altogether fitting that your response and our response collectively should be to make sure that they are treated equally and in an extraordinary manner. We can simply never do enough for our veterans. We love our soldiers, but we turn our back far too often on our veterans. And so it's with the best of intentions that we call on the Veterans Administration to make sure that Black veterans are not excluded from the important care and restoration they need afforded to them in the Pact Act. We call on the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Dennis McDonald, to personally commit his attention and take time to making sure that none of the past injustices and disparities reveal themselves in the practical application of this law. And I must say to all my colleagues, my Democratic colleagues, and my fellow members of the Congressional Black Caucus who were members of the 117th Congress, on behalf of all of the veterans, and particularly of all the Black veterans who make their home in the 1st Congressional District of the state of Illinois, I extend to you my most sincere gratitude for your hard work in making this law a reality. Millions of people will be positively affected by what you have accomplished. Millions of people will find relief and some measure of restoration because of what you have done in the 117th Congress. Millions of veterans will be able to sleep a little sounder at night from the care that they receive because of what you did in the passing of this law. And future veterans will owe much of the improvements we will make in taking care of them to all of you. Well done, good and faithful servants. You have honored this country by caring about the people of this country, and nothing is greater than that. I yield my time back to the Honorable Sheila Surfulis McCormick.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire on how much time is remaining?
Yes, ma'am. You have 14 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again today to be the voice of Black men and women who have selfishly dedicated their lives to the country, but now find themselves on the street. These veterans represent the heart and soul of our nation, serving a country that did not always serve them, and yet we are failing to help them again. Homelessness is felt acutely by Black veterans. Black individuals make up around 12% of active duty military personnel in 2018, but were 33% of the homeless veteran population. Throughout the pandemic, the VA reduced veteran homelessness by 11% and permanently housed over 40,000 veterans. This decrease can be directly attributed to the flexibilities that were found because of the COVID-19 pandemic public health emergency. But now with the PHE having ended, many veterans may soon find themselves out on the street. Unfortunately, Republicans decided to vote against my proposal, H.R. 645, the Healthy Foundations for Homelessness Veterans Act, which would have helped put roofs over veterans' heads. It is shameful. Our brave veterans willingly stepped into the line of fire and accepted the looming shadow of danger, all to safeguard our cherished liberties. To honor that sacrifice, it is our duty as a nation and as members of Congress to ensure they return home to a nation that provides opportunities for them and their families. We must equip our VAs with the necessary tools to directly engage with and provide care for Black veterans grappling with homelessness, housing insecurity. And it isn't a partisan issue. For each day that we, as a Congress, fail to authorize and address veterans' homelessness, we condemn another veteran to a night of needless suffering on the street. The time to act is now. For every night delayed is a night too long for those who have worn our nation's uniform. I urge my colleagues from across the aisles to work with House Democrats so we may serve those who served us. As the nation's greatness is measured not by its military might or its economic power, but by how it treats its most vulnerable citizens, especially those who have served our country so bravely. My Democratic colleagues and I will not leave our veterans behind on this very soil they volunteer to protect and defend. As a member of the Veteran Affairs Committee and ranking member of the Subcommittee for Modernization, I ask all of us to think about this Memorial Day not in the same reverence, but to pledge ourselves to do more for our veterans and to ensure that they are not living in homelessness or housing insecurities and that they're having access to their benefits. Mr. Speaker, I rise again today. Excuse me. Mr. Speaker, I rise again today to pay tribute to the brave men and women who have dedicated their lives to serving our great nation. As a member of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, I pledge to fight for our veterans from all walks of life. Their stories of courage, resilience, and commitment demonstrate a legacy of service and sacrifice. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, post-9/11 veterans are becoming more and more diverse than previous generations. Today, women represent a remarkable 17%, while African Americans make up 15.3% of our current veteran population. We recognize the trailblazers who have not only served our nation, but also enriched diversity of armed forces. I'm fortunate to count among my constituents many such heroes. One of Florida's 20th heroes is Ms. Shanitria Moore, a resident of West Palm Beach. A United States Army veteran, Ms. Moore is a beacon of self-discipline and leads a life guided by her deeply held principles. Ms. Moore graduated with a diploma from the prestigious Academy of Health Science at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and was later honored with an Army Accommodation Award by her commanding officer. Once retired from the active duty, she continued to serve by launching a nonprofit, Shay's Community Initiative, Inc., which provides mentorship and scholarship for young Black men. Ms. Moore's service-oriented philosophy has its roots in her family military experience. Today, as a proud veteran and a dedicated community advocate, she continues to serve with the same excellence she displayed while she was in uniform. Thank you, Ms. Moore, for your service to this great nation and to Florida's 20th Congressional District. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to recognize my father-in-law, Carly McCormick Sr., who's no longer with us, who served as a Vietnam vet. It is now my privilege to yield back the remainder of our time.
The remainder of her time. Thank you very much. Under the